Vegan butter or margarine may not be readily available everywhere, so this recipe uses oil instead and makes it possible for those of you in that situation to still be able to enjoy a good flaky delicious pie crust. Into a large mixing bowl, I'm adding the flour, baking powder and salt. Baking powder is not an ingredient that you would normally use in shortcrust pastry, but I have used it in this recipe to keep the texture a little bit lighter, as the oil alone will tend to make it dense. Give the dry ingredients a mix and then add in the oil. Start working with your fingers and mix the oil around. Then, similar to making a shortcrust pastry, gently rub in the flour and oil mixture with your fingers to create something that eventually looks like fine breadcrumbs. What's great about this oil-based crust is that it is certainly a lot easier to work with. You don't need to take so much care as to not let the butter melt, as it is the case with the traditional shortcrust pastry. In this recipe, I'm using Aquafaba. That's the fancy name for bean juice or chickpea brine. It's the liquid that you collect from a can of beans like chickpeas, white beans or butter beans. I've made my own aquafaba as I boil the beans from dry, so after they are cooked, save the water in which they have been boiling. You can reduce this water to make it thicker. For this recipe though, we don't need it to be too thick, so the amount you'll need will depend on the flour and the oil that you're using. I have used 6 tablespoons, but you may need a little more or less. What we want to achieve is a rather soft, non-sticky dough, so press the moistened flour mixture to form a dough. You can do this on the board if it is easier instead of in the bowl, but do not knead this mixture. Work as little as possible with it to form the dough. Once a smooth ball is formed, you can proceed to rolling it out, or you can place it in a closed container and keep it in the refrigerator for about 15 minutes before using it. This will firm it up a little bit and produce a slightly better texture when baked. By the way, you can also make this dough in advance and either freeze it or keep it for a day in the refrigerator. Then just take it out and allow it to soften enough to be rolled out. The amount of dough in this recipe is enough for a 24 centimeter or 9-inch pie pan or slightly larger. Roll out the dough to the size of the pan plus the depth. To transfer the dough into the pan, you may need to slide a thin knife underneath it first in case it is stuck to the board. Then loosely wrap it around the rolling pin and then unwrap it onto the pan. If the dough breaks, just fix it by pressing the pieces together. Shape and press the dough into the pan so that it fits snugly, and then you can trim off any excess dough. You can re-roll these little bits and use them for smaller pans or cut out shapes from them to decorate the pie. If you want to flute the edge, you can do this by lifting the dough from the edge and then pressing it on either side with the first 2 fingers of the other hand. Work in this way all around. To help the dough bake well and not puff up, prick it with a fork. You can also put some parchment paper on top of the crust with some weight onto it, like dried beans, rice or some baking beads, to prevent it from puffing. But I did not do this with this one as it does not seem to puff up too much. The crust itself will require 25 to 30 minutes to bake at 180 degrees Celsius or 350 degrees Fahrenheit. But for some recipes, you may need to only partially bake it before adding the filling, then bake it again. So you can use this crust with your own fillings. I have some upcoming delicious pie recipes using this crust, like this popular Mauritian custard pie, to which I've added a little twist. So I'll see you soon for these recipes.